All right, good morning, everybody. It is Miss Teacher Lady, and I'm actually late uploading my Friday morning reflection. Actually had another video planned, but I have to take a moment and say that it's more important for me to not be silly, goofy, teach, but to talk about the levels of violence that are happening within our nation and locally within our own community. And so nationally, we have been witnessing mass shootings against minority groups. We've had mass shootings in Colorado at the grocery store. We've had mass shooting in Atlanta, Georgia, at the massage parlors against Asian women and a couple of men. And we've had mass shootings at clubs and at parties. We've had mass shootings at vigils for people. And so we have that on a national scale. I know that many of us understand that these are touchy subjects, but we should be making space and making room for the conversations within our classroom. Whenever things like this happen on a national scale, we should be talking about this within our classrooms, because that is what trauma does. It might not be direct trauma, but it's indirect trauma. So if you have students who are of minority groups, if you have students who are Asian, you should be having these conversations within your classroom about racism and white supremacy. You should be talking about mental health, not just because a white person committed the crime, but in general when it comes to people in our nation and our mental health systems and how they tend to fail and are only brought up when white people are perpetuating crime against minority groups, against people of color. So these are conversations that need to happen in your classroom, but not just in your classroom. You should be making room to have these conversations in your youth groups. You should be having these conversations in your churches. You should be having these conversations in your living room, at the dining room table, talking to your students, to your children, to your youth about what is happening on a national scale. But let me tell you something. What's even more important is that we talk about what's been happening locally in Rochester. In Rochester, we've had 11 homicides in the last 3 months. Most of those homicides have occurred in March. And that is 5 up from the amount of homicides that we had last year. And I don't want to deflate what happened last year, because last year we had about 51 homicides. And so when I think about what is happening within our community, we got to talk about it. We have to talk about it with our young people, because let me tell you something. Many of the crimes that are happening, the homicides that are happening, there are young people under the age of 30. I'm 31 years old, y'all. 31 years old, and I couldn't imagine leaving this earth due to violence. I could not imagine it. And so when I turn on the news or I read an article and I see that another person of color has been murdered, it's mind-blowing to me. We have to have these conversations within our classrooms, because our young people are experiencing trauma on so many levels from so many different institutions, and we have to find ways to protect them, to allow them to understand that when they walk into our churches, when they walk into our classrooms, when they walk into our youth groups, that they are safe in those places, because they don't feel safe in the communities that they're living and growing up in. If you are not talking about this, then you are doing a disservice to the young people that you are connected to. We have to open up our hearts and our minds to look beyond content, to look beyond what's happening on a national scale, because we'll make room to talk about what's happening on a national scale and totally miss what's happening within our own communities. Listen, As a Black mother raising 2 sons and a daughter, it is so important for me to teach them and educate them. Listen, your job is to protect each other. As a community, we have to protect each other, and we have to make room to love each other. The retaliation that's happening within our community, we are losing so many lives. So on one side, we have racism and white supremacy. And then on the other side, we have each other living in these disparaging situations, living in these impoverished communities and impoverished environments, which create poverty mindsets. And so we're not talking about mental health. We're not talking to our young people about, let's do a mental health check. Just because you are not diagnosed does not mean that you don't suffer from some type of mental health issue in the moment, right? Because trauma can induce those things. So I might not be diagnosed with depression, but that doesn't mean that I don't have depressive moments in my life where I'm feeling down and I'm feeling burdened. And it's our job as the educators, as the leaders in our communities, within our classrooms, within our schools, pastors and ministers within your churches, leaders, nonprofit organizations that work with students and young people. It is our jobs to lift them up and to be vocal about what's happening within our community, to not sit idle and say, yes, we can talk about something that is far away from us, but we won't talk about what's happening right now before our eyes. How can you see what's happening within our community and feel nothing and not preach about it or teach about it? The love and the unity that needs to happen. And that speaks to the resources that need to come in to our communities, the opportunities that need to come in to our communities to change and shift the culture of our communities, where we stop fighting each other and join together and fight the systems that be. Listen, as an educator, my job is not just to teach content. My job is to teach young people how to do their own research and how to go out into a system and fight systems that are oppressive. I'm not creating clones in my classroom. I don't want little Shans in my classroom. I don't want little Miss Teacher Ladies in my classroom. I want people who can utilize their minds and see the truth of what exists around them so that they can tackle those issues. And the only way that we can make that happen is if we make room to have the conversations. So let's pray together. Let's educate together. Let's fight together. Let's come together so that our community can be what it needs to be. So the next generation of young people won't experience the trauma that our students, our babies, and our children are dealing with right now. And that's my reflection for this morning. Class dismissed.